Let me tell you this. The more you explain yourself, the more you lose respect. Not because you're wrong, but because you're asking for permission to simply be yourself. It might sound counterintuitive, but this is something many people go through without even realizing it. You didn't raise your voice, you didn't do anything wrong, you were simply trying to clarify your feelings. And yet, over time, you started getting dismissed, interrupted, ignored, or labeled as too sensitive. And the more that happened, the more you felt the urge to explain just to be understood, to be given grace, to be held onto. Until one day you look in the mirror and realize you've been justifying your own existence. In truth, respect doesn't leave you because you're too emotional or too soft. It leaves you when you start giving other people the authority to define who you are through every word you try to say, every time you shrink yourself so someone else doesn't feel uncomfortable, every time you pour your heart out, just to maintain a connection that no longer listens to you. And then one day you're just tired. You don't feel like explaining anymore. You don't feel like convincing anyone. You choose silence not out of anger, not because you gave up, but because you realize those who truly understand you don't need you to speak so much. And those who truly respect you don't wait for you to prove you deserve it. In this video, we're going to explore one simple but powerful truth. Respect doesn't come from the words you force out, it comes the moment you stop explaining. We'll dive into why the more you speak, the less others truly listen. What actually shifts in their psychology the moment you fall silent, instead of defending yourself. And finally, how to reclaim respect not through debate, but through the quiet, shakable strength that lives inside you. If you've ever felt dismissed, talked over, or seen as too much just for being sincere, then this video is for you. No one is born wanting to explain themselves all the time. But over time, we develop a kind of reflex whenever we feel misunderstood, treated unfairly, or sense someone pulling away. We immediately want to clarify. We want them to know we mean no harm, that we're trying, that we don't deserve to be treated that way. And so, without anyone asking, we start to speak, to explain, to justify, to give reasons for things we never should have had to defend in the first place. The more hurt we've been in the past, the more we tend to fear being misunderstood, because to be misunderstood often means being excluded, pushed away, or disconnected, especially for those who grew up in environments where emotions weren't respected, or who were close to someone controlling, critical, or emotionally distant. Being understood can feel like a matter of emotional survival. They don't want to relive that old pain, and to avoid it, they do the one thing they believe might save the connection. They explain. But here's the sad truth: the person who demands the most explanations from you is usually the one who never truly wants to understand. They listen to argue, to dismiss, to prove that you're being too sensitive or reading too much into things. They don't listen to connect, they listen to maintain control in an imbalanced conversation. And that's when you fall into a toxic cycle. You feel misunderstood, so you try to explain. They don't really listen, which makes you more anxious, so you try to explain even more. But the more you try to pull them closer with your words, the more you weaken your position. They begin to feel like they have control over your emotions, and you start to lose the quiet strength you once carried within. From someone seeking understanding, you slowly become someone who's asking for permission just to feel what you feel. Every word you say, instead of helping you feel heard, seems to chip away at your self-worth little by little. Worse, the constant need to explain starts to disconnect you from yourself. You begin to doubt your own emotions. You wonder if you're overreacting, being too sensitive, or simply wrong about everything you're feeling. And when that doubt repeats over and over, you lose touch with what's real inside you. The truth is, the need to be understood is entirely human. But the problem isn't in the feeling itself. The problem lies in trying to be understood by someone who has no intention of understanding. And that's what makes you feel smaller the more you try. The truth is, the person who demands the most explanations from you is usually the one who has already decided not to believe you. And the one who truly listens, sometimes they only need a look, a nod, a shared silence to sense that what you're saying is real and coming from the heart. Every time you feel unheard, you try to explain a little more. Every time they act distant, you tell yourself you need to clarify more so they don't get the wrong idea. But the issue isn't how you speak, it goes deeper. You're trying to prove that your feelings are valid. And the moment you have to prove what's inherently yours, you've already placed yourself at a disadvantage. The truth is, people only feel the need to explain when their right to exist emotionally feels threatened. In unbalanced relationships, you may constantly find yourself trying to justify your own emotions. You begin to feel that unless you explain well enough, the other person will get angry, withdraw affection, or misunderstand you. And because you fear losing that connection, you keep talking more and more until you lose your own clarity. And from there, a pattern takes shape. The more you talk, the less they listen. The more you explain, the more indifferent they become. Not because they don't hear you, but because they know you'll keep trying, keep backing down, keep doing the work for both of you, even if you're the only one putting in the effort. And they get used to that. They get used to you always being the one to bend. They get used to you always reaching out to fix things. They get used to you adjusting yourself every time there's distance, doing everything to save a connection that only you seem to care about. Meanwhile, they don't have to do anything. No apologies, no growth, no accountability. And the most painful part is that even you start to believe their silence is proof that you're not good enough, or not clear enough, not understanding enough. You lean so far toward them that you forget how to stand your own ground. Inner strength doesn't come from how loudly you speak. It comes from whether or not you need to be believed, need to be agreed with, need to be approved. A person with strong inner weight doesn't need to over-explain, because they know their feelings have value even without external approval. But when you constantly seek validation, you're unknowingly giving others the power to decide whether or not you deserve respect. And then one day you look back and no longer recognize yourself. You're no longer the calm, grounded person you used to be, the one who knew their boundaries. You've become someone trapped in a constant state of needing to prove, while the other person no longer has to lift a finger to keep you there. The more you try to prove you're right, the more you lose what matters most, your inner peace. And when that peace is gone, respect slowly fades away with it. Here's a paradox that couldn't be more real. People only start truly listening to you when you stop trying so hard to be heard. The more you strive to be understood, the more predictable you become. The more you try to convince, the more you shrink your own power. And it's precisely when you stop, not because you gave up, but because you understood your limit, that the atmosphere begins to shift. Respect doesn't come rushing back right away, but it starts to flicker in the space you just created. No more long-winded explanations. No more desperate clarifications. No more hopeful glances waiting to be seen. Just stillness. Not the silence of hurt, but the silence of clarity. A kind of silence that makes people stop and start asking questions. They begin to wonder why you're no longer reacting the way you used to, why you're not trying to restart the conversation, why you're still so calm even as the distance grows. And that silence, not passive aggression, not manipulation, is what tells them something has changed. That you've stepped into a new space, one without emotional dependence, without needing validation, and without fearing the loss of someone who never truly saw you. When you stop explaining, you're sending a message louder than any words. I don't need you to understand me to know I'm right. I don't need your agreement to be myself. And I'm no longer staying to prove anything. That very message creates a kind of reverse gravity. When you no longer seek understanding, others begin to feel the loss. When you no longer share your feelings, they begin to feel the emptiness. When you stop trying to fix the relationship, they start to realize maybe they're the ones who need to change. The person who once dismissed you, who once took your sincerity for granted, is now faced with a version of you they can't control with silence, can't shake with coldness, can't provoke with subtle indifference. They realize they no longer hold the power to steer your emotions. And in that quiet space, you begin to reclaim something essential, your place. Not your place in their heart, but your place in the relationship. The place of someone who no longer needs to prove. The place of someone who no longer clings to someone's kindness just to feel worthy. The place of someone strong enough to keep their distance and let others come closer if they truly want to. When someone goes silent, outsiders often assume they're sulking, hurting, or avoiding reality. But the truth is, not all silence is the same. There's a kind of silence born from fear, and there's a kind born from clarity. It's that second kind, the awakened silence, that begins to earn you respect again. The right kind of silence is not passive. It's a statement without words. Because when you stop without justifying, without reacting, without scrambling to fix things, you show that you've seen the whole picture, understood the core of the relationship, and chosen to protect your inner balance over seeking outer validation. In a world full of people who manipulate with words, emotional chaos, and calculated coldness, a person who chooses stillness becomes difficult to deal with. They can't read you, they can't locate your weak points, they no longer know how much you still need them. And that uncertainty makes them cautious. Because people only stay indifferent toward those they believe will always stay. But when you no longer carry that unspoken need to explain just to be kept, they have to start asking themselves, did I push this person too far? Are they pulling back their trust? Is this silence the final word? Your silence holds weight because it's placed on the table after you've seen everything clearly. No yelling. No dramatic boundaries drawn with harsh words. Just the quiet decision to no longer fight to be right. Not because you stopped believing in your truth, but because you know the ones who truly want to understand will look deeper without needing a full breakdown from you. And that's when respect begins to return, not because you intimidated anyone, but because you've stepped outside the realm of their emotional control. Their silence no longer triggers you. A delayed text no longer rattles you. A cold glance no longer sends you spiraling. You simply sit, hold your ground, and let silence speak on your behalf. In a world where people are used to controlling others with words, a person who knows when to stop is not someone you can take lightly. In every relationship, there are moments when you feel tested: a poorly timed comment, a sudden coldness, an intentional dismissal. And in those moments, your instinct is often to react. You want to say something. You want to clarify. Or at least prove that your silence isn't weakness. But the more you react on impulse, the easier it is to get pulled into someone else's emotional game. They throw out an attitude and you catch it. They go quiet and you fill the space. They withdraw and you chase. And just like that, you begin to lose your footing, not because you were wrong, but because you let their emotions dictate your moves. True strength doesn't come from reacting. It comes from pausing, observing, recognizing what's happening inside you, and then choosing your response from a place of calm, not control. Being awake doesn't mean being numb. It means you no longer let others decide how you feel based on how they treat you. They can be distant, but you don't rush to warm things up. They can be cold, but you don't shrink in fear of disconnect. They can misunderstand you, but you no longer scream just to be seen. You still feel. You still hurt, but you're not dragged by it. You still have emotions, but you no longer act from them. And it's in that space between what you feel and how you respond that your inner power is born. When you no longer react to every shift in someone else's behavior, you become grounded. You're no longer tossed around by their waves. You stand like a stone in a river. The current may be strong, but you're not moved by it. And the other person starts to feel that. They begin to sense they can no longer steer you with attitude, words, or half-hearted silence. You're no longer easily swayed by their instability. You've become your own emotional center of gravity. And that steadiness, that unshakable presence, is exactly what forces them to change the way they approach you. Because when people realize they can no longer control you with emotions, they're left with only one option. They have to respect you. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. And you don't have to explain yourself to be understood. Because sometimes what makes people change the way they treat you doesn't come from your words, it comes from the shift in your energy. When you're still emotionally dependent on someone, the energy you give off often carries a subtle sense of asking to be heard, asking to stay, asking to be valued. And even if you never say it out loud, the other person feels it. Humans are incredibly intuitive when it comes to insecurity. They sense that you need them, that you seek validation, that you're trying to hold on to the relationship at any cost, and so they grow comfortable, sometimes even careless, dismissive, or overbearing. But the moment you step out of that state, the moment you stop seeking approval from the outside, you begin to radiate a completely different kind of energy, calm yet firm, quiet but not passive, still but unmistakably grounded. And that energy, more than anything you could ever say, is what makes people start to respect you. It's in your gaze, no longer uncertain, in your posture, no longer defensive, in the way you stay silent without retreat, and walk away without needing to look back. No explaining, no justifying, no revisiting old conversations. You carry yourself as if to say, I know my worth. I'm not here to beg to be kept. And that very presence, no matter how cool someone tries to act, makes them take notice. Because now you're no longer predictable. You're no longer easy to soften. You're no longer holding on to connection by compromising who you are. And for that reason, you become rare and valuable. In a world where everyone is constantly reacting, the one who holds their silence is the one with real power. In a time where everyone is shouting to be noticed, the person who steps aside in quiet self-possession is the one who makes others turn their heads. You don't need to win with words. You don't need to prove you're right in a debate. You don't need anyone to finally understand in order to feel valid. You just need to stand steady, like a truth that doesn't need to be explained. And in that moment, it's your energy that causes them to pause, to reflect, and to begin engaging with you from a completely different place. There's something most people don't realize. Timely silence carries more weight than any sentence ever spoken. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you've come to understand that sometimes not saying anything is the clearest response of all. When you stop explaining, people are forced to think instead of react. When you stop trying to clarify, they're left to ask themselves, did I miss something important? Did I take something valuable for granted? And in that quiet space, you're no longer the one who gets hurt easily. You become the one who makes them feel the loss. You don't disappear dramatically. You simply withdraw your familiar presence. You don't accuse. You don't burn bridges with harsh words. You just stop showing up with the energy that used to overflow with grace. You stop responding in ways that made them feel indulged. You stop protecting their emotions more than your own. And that shift feels unfamiliar to them. Because people only start to reevaluate a connection once it's no longer readily available. The more predictable your presence, the more they take you for granted. The more you try to maintain connection with words, the more they pull away to stay in control. But when you step back calmly, without bitterness, without theatrics, they're forced to admit, you're no longer within their emotional grip, and your absence carries more weight than all your presence ever did. People don't respect you because you yelled, argued, or insisted on being right. They respect you when you're strong enough to walk away from a game you no longer want to play. They respect you when you're silent enough to leave without slamming the door. They respect you when you no longer need validation from them because you've already claimed it from within yourself. And when they return, if they do, it won't be to ask for another round of explanations. They'll come back because they now know that silence wasn't an empty space for them to fill with promises. It was a boundary firmly and quietly drawn. The more composure you keep as you withdraw, the clearer and more valuable you become in the mind of the person who once took you for granted. Here's a truth many people struggle to face. As long as you still feel the need to earn someone's respect, you're still handing them the power to define your worth. And the moment that happens, you're no longer acting from inner freedom, you're reacting from emotional dependence, constantly explaining, justifying, or trying to hold on to something to feel whole. As long as you need them to understand you, you'll keep explaining. As long as you need them to trust you, you'll keep justifying. And as long as you're afraid to lose the connection, you'll accept things you don't deserve, even forgive before they've changed. Gradually, you stop being centered in yourself and become a distorted version of who you are, constantly adjusting to whatever little in to offer. But a true turning point begins when you stop needing that. No more explanations. No more hoping to be understood. No more forcing yourself to be reasonable just to be kept. You begin to walk away from the need for validation, and in that very moment, you become someone who can no longer be manipulated. Because once you no longer seek respect from the outside to confirm your worth on the inside, you start to emit a completely different kind of energy, calm, steady, and whole. You no longer need to be seen to know you belong. And that energy is what finally compels others to adjust how they treat you. At this point, you no longer react to indifference, and you no longer spiral in someone's silence. You don't need to be heard to feel your words have value, because the quiet within you has become so steady, it no longer gets shaken by the noise outside. And when that stillness becomes your identity, you no longer need respect, but others start to offer it to you naturally. Not because you demanded it, but because you stopped depending on it. Respect, then, is no longer a prize you chase. It becomes the natural consequence of someone who knows who they are, knows what they need, and refuses to trade their truth just to stay in someone's life. You don't enter relationships to be validated. You show up with the value you already carry, and if that's not met with equal recognition, you have the strength to walk away quietly, but with resolve. Not because you're cold, but because you've grown. Because in the end, the one who no longer needs to be respected to feel worthy is the one who always ends up being respected naturally, without effort, without explanation. Ultimately, you don't need to say a lot to be understood. You don't need to argue to prove your point. And you don't need to stay in a relationship just to convince someone you're worth keeping. Because true worth doesn't lie in what you try to make others see, it lies in no longer questioning it yourself. Respect doesn't come from how well you explain or how much you endure. It comes from an inner state, a place where you no longer feel the need to make it clear just to be seen. When you stop explaining, you don't just reclaim your peace. You reclaim your inner gravity, that quiet weight people can feel, telling them you're not someone to dismiss, not someone to control, and not someone easily replaced. The freer you become in your silence, the clearer you appear to others. Not because you're trying to impress, but because you no longer need to. You choose to keep what's worthy. You let go of what disconnects you from yourself. And the moment you walk away without anger, without a show, without slamming the door, you send a message louder than any words. I don't need you to feel worthy. But if you want to walk with me, step forward with respect. Respect can't be begged for. It can't be forced. It only comes when you are quiet enough not to need it, and awake enough never to trade yourself just to hold on to someone else.